Okay, there's a kind of risk that doesn't just fail, it backfires so hard it takes things with it. Not just money, not just jobs. I'm talking about legacy, potential, or entire futures, really. And sometimes the worst part is, it didn't even come from greed or laziness. It actually came from ambition. Ambition kind of set in the wrong place, like from a company that should have known better. This video isn't about a bad game, not this time. This is about a movie. A movie that burned so much cash it changed the course of one of the greatest RPG studios of all time. A movie that, on its own, shut the door on sequels fans were actually still waiting for, and currently still waiting for. The movie is called Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, and it was so much more than a bomb. Much like the last few videos, this is the story of risk. But more importantly, this is a story of failed risk. This mistake actually set off a number of events that ultimately led to a dream never being able to complete itself. Roll the title. It doesn't matter what you think, late 90s, Square was untouchable. They had money, they had vision, they had Final Fantasy VII, mostly that, and it changed everything, not just for fans, but for them. 7 wasn't just a hit, it was validation. That cinematic storytelling in games could really actually mean something ultimately, that audiences would show up for something bold. And they doubled down on that with 8, and then again with 9. Every one of those games took a risk, and each one of them paid off in full. And you could feel it, Square wasn't just making RPGs anymore, they were chasing something bigger. But I think that's when the obsession started. CGI, back in its early infant stages, hyper-realism, film quality animation. You've seen it in plenty of those CGI tech demos early on, not as a tool for storytelling, but more as the next frontier of gaming. It started with the PS2 tech demos, and faces were so detailed and lighting was sharp. They weren't trying to impress or anything like that. They were trying to prove they could transcend gaming. It was nuts. I remember seeing plenty of them and actually just recoiling over just how real everything looked. But at the center of all of that push was a man named Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy himself, the man who saved Square with his first roll of the die, and who was now ready to roll again. He wanted to make a movie, not just a game, not a cutscene, but a real, full-fledged Hollywood movie. And when you're riding high, when every idea you touch turns into gold, who the hell is going to stop you? Back then, the games were everything to me. I could play the games and enjoy them, ad nauseum, over and over and over, put in all the hours, talk about it with friends, collect the artwork, read the magazines, that sort of thing. So when they announced that a movie was coming out, I barely had any information to ride with, except for the fact that it almost looked futuristic and space age. I think the very first still I got was a guy who looked like he was fresh out of Star Wars. Something about that didn't sit right with me, but, they were using the name, so it had to be Final Fantasy. At least I assumed it did. I thought maybe I was being too pessimistic about it. Maybe the hype train would arrive and it would, come with a whole bunch of trailers and things like that. Maybe there was something I didn't understand about it. Maybe this was going to be another step forward. I didn't know that step was actually going to be off a cliff. See, here's the thing. Square Pictures wasn't born in a boardroom or anything like that. This wasn't a meeting, a town hall, or anything like that. This was straight born in an arrogant fever. This just exploded out of nowhere, and they just kind of went with a whim decision. They were still riding high off of Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. Sakaguchi had a vision, and he couldn't be shaken. Nobody was going to tell the man who reinvented JRPGs that he was dreaming too big. So they didn't open a studio in Tokyo, they opened one in Hawaii, because that makes sense. They didn't reuse what they had, they built everything from the ground up. And I do mean the ground up. Custom motion capture pipelines, advanced facial rigs, lighting systems, rendering farms, hair physics. They made everything from scratch. This wasn't just about telling a story anymore, this is about proving games could evolve past gaming. And at the center of the storm was Sakaguchi. Not the exec, not the name on the box, but the artist, the storyteller, the man who wanted Final Fantasy to stand shoulder to shoulder with full-fledged cinema. But here's the thing about dreamers, they don't think in risk, they think in reach. And I think that's where the cracks started, because Sakaguchi wasn't making Final Fantasy anymore, he was just making his story. No chocobos, no summons, no crystals, no magic, no Mako, no Moogles, none of it. He went well beyond the confines of traditional Final Fantasy fare and lore. He wanted a serious film. He a spiritual sci-fi tale. He wanted emotion, humanity, legacy. He wanted Akira meets Ridley Scott. Like, nobody stopped him, because at that point, who could? The man had saved the company, so when the budget ballooned to 137 million, they let it happen. They built an entire company to support this film. Square Pictures wasn't a side project, it was a damn pillar. And inside the company, there were murmurs. People in Square Japan were nervous. Some in Enix called it reckless. Others flat out saw it as a vanity project. And they weren't wrong. This wasn't a movie designed to earn, it was designed to prove something. But in trying to prove that games could become film, they forgot one thing that made games matter: interactivity, connection, choice, agency, emotion you had to earn. The Spirits Within looked absolutely stunning. It was cutting edge. It still is, honestly. Like, if you watch it today, without a doubt. But it had the soul of something being pitched, not shared. And when the final frames rolled, when the box office receipts came back, everything that Square had built to support the dream collapsed right the hell under it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we even talk about Fallout, let's stop and look at what the film actually was. Because this wasn't some shallow cash-in train wreck. It was trying to be something important, something huge, and it almost was. Let's start with the story, for instance. The year's 2065, the Earth is wrecked. It's not really dystopian, it's more scarred. It's infested with creatures called phantoms. Now, these phantoms were invisible spectral life forms that drain the life force out of people on contact. When they touch you, they essentially rip your soul out, sci-fi horror level. To fight them, humanity hides in shielded cities, like barrier domes, while outside, the rest of the planet just dies. So, our protagonist, Dr. Aki Ross, she's infected with a phantom particle that's inside of her, and she's somehow surviving. She believes the Earth is alive, that Gaia, a planetary spirit, exists, and she thinks there's a way to heal it. Together with her mentor, Dr. Sid, she starts collecting 8 unique energy signatures called spirits. Each one is a kind of harmonic pattern that, when combined, can kind of neutralize the phantoms. And then there's a military guy, General Hain. He doesn't buy any of it. He wants to use a massive orbital cannon called Zeus to blow the phantoms out of the crater they came from. Classic conflict, belief versus force, science versus control, so on and so forth. Aki's joined by Gray Edwards and his Deep Eyes squad. There's tension, action, sacrifice, death. I think Steve Buscemi's in it as well. Eventually, they find the 8th spirit inside the Phantom Crater, transmit the wave, and then it works. Voila, Earth is saved, Gray dies, Aki lives, the end. That was the pitch. It was just a grounded sci-fi epic, no chocobos or any of that stuff. It was called Final Fantasy, but it wasn't Final Fantasy. And the general audience kind of soaked it in for a second. Visually, nobody questioned it. They loved it. It looked beautiful. Even today, The Spirits Within, like I said, is just, it's a good-looking movie. It was the first feature-length film with photorealistic human CGI characters. This was new wave, trend-setting, all that good stuff. The fidelity of the skin, hair, animation, all of that shit was cutting edge. And now here's the thing, that movie cost about $137 million to make, and it earned about $85 million in total. That's not a loss, that's a fucking crater. Rotten Tomatoes, 44%. Metacritic, 49%. Cinema score from audiences, C+. Critics said it was beautiful but boring as hell. They praised the ambition but slammed the characters and the story. They said it lacked heart and that it felt like an expensive demo reel. And the truth is, they weren't wrong. The gamers, though, it was a completely different vibe. The second this was announced as a Final Fantasy film, people expected something from that world. Not just direct references, but kind of the soul of the game itself. Instead, what they got was a hard sci-fi concept with spiritual overtones and zero fan service. And I mean, the forums lit up, and they were forums back then because Reddit wasn't a thing. Yes, I'm that old. But they were lit up for not rage and anger-inducing reasons. They were confused. All the fans were confused. Why is this called Final Fantasy? It looks amazing, but I don't care about anyone. It looks like they made a tech demo and called it a story, like that sort of thing. People were trying to connect with it, but nothing reached back. The film had big ideas, don't get me wrong. Ecology, spirituality, harmony, death, rebirth. Zero warmth, though. It's a cold plate of spaghetti. Even the best scenes felt posed, like action figures playing out a scene. They were waiting for applause instead of actually earning it. The emotional moments didn't land, not because the actors were bad, but because the faces still hadn't escaped that uncanny valley. For those that don't know what the uncanny valley is, it's a phenomenon where an object or entity looks almost, but not perfectly human, and it kind of evokes feelings of eeriness and discomfort in the observers. Yeah, it kind of felt that way. It was real, just not real enough. And you can't cry for a character whose eyes don't look real. The tech, the ambition, the risk, all of that worked on paper, and the fact that the game studio even tried this is still fucking nuts. The score was great, the cast was stacked. We had Oh, we had everybody. They had voices like Ming-Na Wen, Alec Baldwin, Steve Buscemi, Donald Sutherland, Ving Rhames. They even had Keith David in there, but then again, he's a voice for everything. I still love him though, whatever. It's just, on paper, it sounded so good. But what didn't work overall as a movie was the pacing, tone, branding. Calling it Final Fantasy raised expectations almost immediately. The film didn't even try to meet it, and people felt cheated because of it. It felt like the name was used as a safety net, even though the whole project was clearly anything but safe. But ultimately, because the movie flopped, the ripples just didn't hit the stock price, it hit the soul of the company. The Square Enix merger got delayed, investors panicked, Square Pictures got shut down, Sakaguchi, he got reassigned to executive figurehead roles. And as for the players, the trust was broken. Final Fantasy wasn't just a brand anymore. It was a name being licensed out. It was a name being spent. The sense that the studio knew what you loved and why took a definite hit. They chased Hollywood, and they left behind the thing that made people stay up till 3 a.m. for boss fights and heartbreak and resolution. It's not that they failed, it was how they failed, by forgetting that people didn't want realistic, they just wanted real. So now we're dealing with the fallout. And, you know, with the, as I mentioned before, the $137 million film that made 85 back wasn't enough to save Square, who was already over-leveraged from building a movie studio from scratch. The financial wound wasn't just deep, it was much worse than deep, it was public. Analysts called it a disaster, headlines treated it like a punchline, game sites, movie sites, everyone had something to say. But what a lot of people didn't realize was how fast that bomb went off behind the scenes. Square Pictures itself, just created, just made with all of its nice bells and whistles, was shut down immediately, gone, dismantled. All that tech, that team, the infrastructure, it torpedoed after one film. And Sakaguchi, the man who started all this, he was just moved. He was stripped of all creative control for starters. He was given a symbolic executive producer title, the kind you give to someone when you want their name in the box, but not exactly the hands on the wheel. And in that shuffle, a lot of projects quietly disappeared. One of those projects was Xenogears 2. Monolith Soft's president, Hirohide Sugiura, confirmed it himself. The sequel was on the table. It was going to happen. But Square could not afford it. Not after the movie. Not after the studio nearly bled out trying to become something it wasn't. And just like that, it was gone. The vision that Xenogears promised, a 6-part epic dense with philosophy, lore, and mecha warfare, got reduced to a single brilliant, overstuffed game and a shrug. Fans were waiting, the groundwork had been laid, and none of it mattered. All because of a movie that wasn't even in the same universe, not thematically, narratively, emotionally, just really financially. And I think that's what makes it so painful. The spirits within didn't just kill a franchise it was a part of, it killed one it had nothing to do with. That's the danger with massive risks. You don't just fall apart, they pull things down with them. A studio gambled its future on legitimacy, and the price was the end of something that was absolutely already legitimate. Xenogears didn't fail, it got caught in the crossfire. At this point, Square was crumbling from the inside. Not everybody waited to see how the dust would settle, though. Sakaguchi was sidelined, Square Pictures was dead in the water, budgets were frozen, projects were all quietly canceled. It was a bloodbath. But not everyone sat still, though. Hirohide knew this was coming. He wasn't just a producer, he saw the numbers. He saw the politics, and he saw something that scared him more than failure. Square was now playing it safe. Final Fantasy X-2 came out, or X2, depending on who's in my comment section yelling at me, and it was the first direct sequel in Final Fantasy history, and it reused the world, characters, engine, and everything from Final Fantasy X, kept completely safe, and tried to attract a more casual crowd. And then there was Kingdom Hearts as well. Creative, yes, but it was also calculated, and it was a brand merger designed to expand the demographic reach, especially in the West. And then a slew of compilation games for Final Fantasy VII, like Crisis Core, Before Crisis, Advent Children, all that good stuff. Now, Advent Children is especially interesting because despite the fact that CGI movies were where they were headed, it's not so much where they were headed now. So they played it safe and made this as one of the 4 games / movies that came out during the distribution of the Legacy collections. But that was it. That was all you were getting out of that whole collection. By the time Kingdom Hearts ended and the compilation games, that was kind of it for Final Fantasy VII and CGI movies as a whole, at least then, because, of course, the idea of CG movies were expensive, and I'm pretty certain the companies were shell-shocked after their biggest loss in investing so much into CGI movies. Advent Children was insanely awesome regardless, but it just didn't return the kind of dividends they were looking for, which furthered their belief that going down a movie path just was not on the table. You guys got me sidetracked though. Okay, going back. Hirohide saw these issues from Square, and if you're trying to finish a sprawling 6-part, philosophically dense, spiritually abstract RPG epic, the last thing you need is a publisher that's nervous. So Hirohide walked, but he didn't walk alone. He took Tetsuya Takahashi with him, the writer and director of Xenogears, and he also took Xenosaga, the woman who co-plotted that wild, beautiful, painful story. He took artists, writers, engineers, and they built something new. And that something new was Monolith Soft. It was an RPG house with a chip on its shoulder and a vision that refused to die. And once they were established, they started to work on something. Not Xenogears 2. They couldn't legally touch that. Square still owned that IP and the world and the name, which was awful, so they had to move on. But they made something else, something that looked like a prequel almost. It felt like a sequel, but legally, it was brand new. They called it Xenosaga. And if you knew, you knew. The same themes, the same existential crisis, the same Gnostic overtones, the same obsession with souls, machines, gods, and guilt. It was Xenogears wearing a new face, a survival tactic dressed as a reboot. But it wasn't just a knockoff, it was a message. And that message was, you will not kill this, you just lost the right to finish it. And even though the tone was different, even though the structure changed, even though the corporate backing had shifted from Square to Namco, you could feel it. They still believed in this, and they still had something to say. Xenosaga was raw, it was wordy, heavy-handed at times, but it did not flinch. It looked Square in the eyes and said, we don't need your name, we have the idea. And that's what saved face. Not a sequel or a redemption arc, but a refusal to let the original failure become the final word in the series. So Xenosaga Episode 1 made it out. It shipped, it said everything it wanted to say loudly, and for a second it felt like they'd made it. But the industry did not even budge. The critics didn't rally, the mainstream didn't move. Sales were decent, enough to continue anyway, but not enough to embolden. Namco looked at the results and didn't see this potential, they just saw a risk. And they moved fast to contain it. Episode 1 was supposed to be the beginning of a 6-part epic. This should sound familiar. That plan got cut the moment the numbers came back. The new directive? Condense it. Wrap it up. Keep the themes, but make it cleaner, quicker, more manageable. So they did what publishers always do when art doesn't convert. They streamlined it. Episode 2 launched with new character models, a shorter runtime, heavier action, less talk, less weird. The pacing changed, the world started to shrink. The philosophy didn't go away, but it had to fit inside the corporate notes. You could feel it in the direction, to be fairly honest. We don't hate what you made, we just don't trust you to make it again. And by the time episode 3 dropped, Monolith was already closing the door behind them. They called it the final chapter. Not because the story was over, but because the platform was gone. It was respectful, thoughtful, but very much so final. If there's ever a fight where it's vision versus budget, vision almost certainly loses every single time. The original team was worn down, the 6-part epic was disassembled, the torch that Sakaguchi had lit inside them was pretty much non-existent. It was the same cycle that Square had fallen into after The Spirits Within, the same pivot from ambition to preservation. But this time it happened outside the walls. And this time, it wasn't a movie that killed the momentum, it was the math. There's a reason why people say Monolith Soft learned how to survive in reverse. It's because they started with everything they wanted to say and then learned what they were allowed to say next. And by 2007, Monolith Soft had been through it. Xenosaga was done, Namco was losing interest. The dream that was once 6 parts deep had been compressed, rearranged, retired, and then something unexpected happened. Nintendo stepped in. Not as a collaborator or anything like that, but as a buyer. They acquired Monolith Soft quietly, no fireworks, no hype campaign, just a simple exchange. You bring your vision, we give you stability. And that's when yet another new chapter started. This time the game was Xenoblade Chronicles. This was no sequel or continuation, but an overall new attempt. The ideas were still there, massive philosophical scope and everything like that, but the world's resting on the backs of gods, flesh and steel, man and machine, all that, pretty much it was all there. But the tone was different. The desperation was gone, the jagged edges were softened. This wasn't a scream into the void, it was a crafted product, a high-concept open-world RPG with Nintendo's polish and Nintendo's limits. They were no longer in survival mode, but they weren't unchecked anymore either. But it worked. Xenoblade Chronicles found its audience. It grew, it evolved, it got sequels, spin-offs, Smash Brother appearances. Monolith Soft was thriving. It was no longer chasing ghosts. No more Xenosaga, no more Xenogears, no more unfinished business. Just a new series with some old blood still visible beneath the surface. This story didn't end with a franchise being saved. Far from it, actually. It didn't end with a comeback or a sequel or a big redemption arc either. It ended with two companies, both full of talented people, learning what happens when risk fails. Square took a swing at cinema. They bet on a film that didn't resemble their identity, and when it collapsed, they retreated into sequels, into brand security, into collaborations that guaranteed survival, but not expression. At least in my opinion. Monolith took a different path. They walked away from the machine, they rebuilt from scratch, and they made Xenosaga. But they didn't escape the consequences. Even with a new publisher, they hit the same wall. Money, patience, market tolerance. It's all finite. So they pivoted again, and this time they found shelter. Nintendo gave them a home, and in doing so, gave them limits. And the result of that was Xenoblade. It was a success, a stable future. But not the same fire, not the same risk. And I think that's what ties this whole story together. The Spirits Within didn't just cost Square money, it cost them their appetite. It showed them what could happen when you aim for something nobody asked for, and the industry took notes. You can still see it in modern dev cycles, games tested to death, focus groups, crossovers, live service fragments stuffed into single-player stories. It's all safety nets. Nobody wants to be the Spirits Within. Believe me when I say I get it. As a business, I understand the concern and the awareness of what happens when things go south. But also on the same token, and this may be a hot take for some, we need those failures. We need them because they show us how far a studio is willing to go to put out a good product, to entertain, to tell a story. They show us who's really chasing the edge and who's just building fences around their old success. Everyone always gripes on me and talks to me like I'm an old head just wishing for a better day or back in the day, my time, all that stuff. You guys aren't really understanding the whole point behind the words that I'm saying here. The point is not to just relive a past. The point is to be as bold and daring as they were in the past. And if that is nostalgic, then I have the rosiest tinted glasses. Sakaguchi dreamed too big, Takahashi spoke too loudly, Square hid, Monolith bent, and in the end, all of them survived, but not all of them finished what they started. That's what happens. It has to happen. You have to go through life with a number of spills and dips and injuries in order to see what happens next, and it has to build something bigger and better. There's a rabid fan base right now who loves Xenoblade Chronicles, and if it weren't for that god-awful movie, and it was awful, trust me, I own a copy, I own all bad movies that were based on video games, but I digress. If it weren't for that bad movie, Xenoblade Chronicles would never have existed. But then again, if it weren't for that god-awful movie, Xenosaga would never have existed, and Xenogears would have had parts 1 through 6 as some long-winded space opera. Like, these things happen for a reason. Things go up and they go down, but no matter what, it only happens with risk. If every company stays safe, if every company just does exactly what they've been doing, we're going to see the same games until the end of time. And then when your children or children's children play games, they're going to be reliving your memories and not the memories built on their own past and on their own recollection of how games were. Nobody wants to see God of War 27 so that you can tell your grandchildren, when I was young, Kratos used to do this, and now it's not the same because now he does. That's not what we want to see. We want to see something different, something new, something exciting. So now I'm going to ask you, not which game was better. I don't do that here, not on my channel. You know better than that. Not even who was right. I'm asking, what's the right price for ambition? Do we let failure decide what risks were worth it? Or do we just risk and risk and risk and throw everything at everything until something happens worth remembering? Look, if all we reward are the safe bets, what happens to the ones still trying to build something bigger than a brand? What happens to the person who just has a crazy idea? What happens to that guy? As a matter of fact, drop your thoughts below. Give me one of your favorites, and I don't mean favorites as in everyone loves it. I mean favorites as in that game, based on how weird or kooky it was, it just stuck with you, even if it didn't land completely. Just something about it has charmed you to the point in which it became your favorite, despite what the world thought and despite whether or not it got its own franchise deal. Shout out to my folks on Patreon and all my YouTube members. You guys are the reason I do what I do, as well as the new viewers that have popped in over the course of the last 2 months. My channel has seen a spike to which I've never seen before in my life. I won't lie to you, this is new for me. However, as always, pop in the comments. That's where I like to see you guys discuss things, and I like to have the back and forths. If you need anything from me, you know where to find me. In the meantime, I'm going to get the hell out of here. Much love, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.